we will begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggles for justice, love, and peace. Amen. So it is my honor to introduce our guest tonight, Michael Downs, who I think so many of you know, even personally. Michael Downs works in California at a Catholic high school as the Director of Justice and Kinship. He graduated from Capitol High here in Montana. He also is an author of the National Catholic Reporter, I think, and other publications, and he has a passion for protecting our earth. So we are so honored to have you here. So thank you so much, Michael. And I will hand it over to you.
Hi, Michael. Say something.
All right. Hey, Aunt Liz, can you see my screen?
Yeah, Mike.
All right. Hey, thanks for being the first one here, Liz, and thanks for your patience. You were here 15 minutes early. Well, listen, I just want to deep bow of gratitude to St. Mary's community for this invitation, especially to Dawn and to Barb Keegan for inviting me into this space. And, I serve on a few different roles right now, but I give a lot of the credit for these roles to my upbringing in Helena. So I'm Director of Justice and Kinship at a Catholic high school in Oakland called Bishop O'Dowd, which has sort of a legacy of leadership at the intersection of ecology and spirituality and justice. I'm the lone educator on California Catholic Bishops' Environmental Stewardship Committee, and then I've also been invited to serve on the Vatican's Laudato Si Action Platform Working Group for Educational Institutions. Most importantly, I'm a Helena native, and although I had most of my sacraments across this town at the cathedral, have a lot of fond memories of the St. Mary's community, especially when my grandparents, Court and Betty Harrington, were there, and now my beloved uncle and aunt, Harry and Liz Downs, are active members. So just so grateful for that community, and those of you who also have supported my family, especially my mom, Jeannie, in the wake of my father's passing last October. So it's wonderful to be with you. And I'm excited to share what I've been learning and hopefully inspire and challenge you to join on the journey. So first and foremost, I'm also a parent and an educator. My kids, Isaiah and Claire, are there on the left walking our dog Meatball with the sunset over San Francisco in the distance. And on the right, some of my students in our 4-acre living lab outdoor classroom, which you'll hear more about later. And, just facing the reality that they are exploring existential questions that we never had to about life on the planet. It's an honor to be a parent and a teacher right now. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Laudato Si, Pope Francis's groundbreaking 2015 encyclical about the environment. And if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. And if you have, Hope you continue to draw inspiration from its passages. And I want to start by sharing my favorite passage and then invite you to engage with it. And this is a beautiful moment right at the beginning where the Pope really grounds us in those places that have touched our minds, touched our hearts, where we feel at home. So I wanted you, as you hear this, to kind of imagine what your particular place is. He writes, "The entire material universe speaks of God's love, his boundless affection for us. Soil, water, mountains, everything is, as it were, a caress of God. The history of our friendship with God is always linked to particular places, which take on an intensely personal meaning. We all remember places, and revisiting those memories does us much good. Going back to these places is a chance to recover something of our true selves." So for me, my particular place is just over McDonald Pass before you hit Elliston. If you take a left down the YMCA Camp Child Road and then turn up Mile High Lane, there's a 10-acre plot that my dad and his brothers purchased when my mom was pregnant with me. So this plot of land, it really is like a twin sibling to me. And they eventually built a cabin on it. And this is a shot of my dad and I having a celebratory stogie over the changing landscape. It used to be very thick with pine trees, but after the pine beetle kind of ravaged those forests several years ago, it's now becoming more of an aspen grove. And if you walk up above our land, this is the spot where I go to feel most at home, to remember who I am. And it's at the foot of a beautiful wildflower meadow, a pine tree that's been cut in half by a lightning strike. And so I sometimes go when I'm home and just sit and lay underneath this, and just to remember connectedness and resiliency, and to have a view looking back towards Helena over those rolling hills of my childhood. And this is one of the places that comes to mind when I hear that passage from Laudato Si. So I'd actually like to send you into a small group, brief conversation to start with your own sense of groundedness in one of your particular places. What's a particular place
Thanks, Fran.
in nature which takes on a personal meaning for you, where you recover something of your true self? Maybe it's the Jubilee Garden outside St. Mary's. Maybe it's up Mount Helena. There's my son a few years ago, looking back over town. Maybe it's somewhere out of town or out of state. So I invite you to take a minute to reflect on your particular place, and then I'll send you in with 2 or 3 other folks. And if you each took just about a minute to share what your place is, where it is, and why that's the one that's touched your heart. Hey, welcome back. If you feel comfortable and tech savvy enough, I invite you to drop into the chat what's a particular place that came up for you where you feel connected to your true self. Nina's particular place is the backside of Mount Ascension.
I think for everyone in our group, it had something to do with mountains, particularly Mount Ascension, but also the valley with the mountains that you see.
Thank you, Barb. The South Hills above Unionville in the forest. We'll wait a few more seconds if anyone else wants to type or share the place that came to mind in that opening question. Glacier or Yellowstone, the beach at Apgar Village, the Lake McDonald.
Yes, sir.
2 cemeteries. with our daughter at the base of the Great Wall in China with snow falling. Wow. Okay, thank you so much.
I see Gary. Very cool.
Hi.
Hey, Gary. All right, now I'm nervous. So I like to begin each of my presentations with 3 acknowledgements, and I think this helps ground me, but also remind all of us in community sort of where we are and when we are and who we are. So I just wanted to acknowledge the land that we're on and the time that we live in, and some of the privileges that we bring to the space that I bring. So first, can everyone see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So first I'd like to acknowledge the land I'm on and getting to steward with my students and kids is traditionally the land of the Ohlone people, and who lived here sustainably for literally thousands of years. And so I'm grateful for how they maintained the Bay Area before their culture was really decimated by Western expansion, but also the practices that they've instilled in generations that followed to help us maintain this ecosystem. And in that spirit of gratitude, to remind you that you're on the land traditionally held by the Blackfeet and Salish people. And again, we hold with gratitude and with humility the way that they were in relationship with land as kin. The second acknowledgement I'd like to make is just remembering where we are in time. We live at a time where humanity is having an unprecedented impact on the planet. And therefore, these conversations are important. They have ramifications for our future and even our current generations. And this graphic shows things that are not some sort of futuristic dystopia. These are things that are already happening. And some of these perhaps have hit closer to home for you than others. In particular, you've all been touched by drought and wildfire and smoke season. You all are witnessing the glaciers of Glacier Park disappearing before our eyes, et cetera. Where I am, certainly the wildfires hit home, and we have urban centers hitting higher and higher temperatures each year. This is a time where the global scientific community is shouting together like never before. I just want to share very briefly 2 really important takeaways from last year's key moments at the interfaith panel on intergovernmental panel on climate change came out with a document, and then we had the Council of Parties number 26 in Scotland. And again, they're just underscoring collectively that climate change is human-induced, widespread, rapid, and intensifying. And we need very fast action to avoid catastrophe. For those of us that are parents or grandparents or involved in educational leadership like me, one thing we're taking note of in terms of this time context is what developmental psychologists historically call adverse childhood experiences. And usually you could predict students thriving or struggling partly based on their experiences at home or in their community of trauma. And what they're seeing now is more and more young people are adding a 3rd category, which is environmental adverse childhood experiences. So those of us that care for children need to take note. And one more thing I want to share about the acknowledging the time context comes from a very interesting long-term study out of Yale University on, they have a program on climate change communication. And what they've identified is that really in this country, there's 6 different Americas in terms of how we view climate change. And these range from folks who are really alarmed, to concerned, to cautious, and then down to disengaged, doubtful, or just outright dismissive. And it would help me in terms of reading this room, if you could put in the chat, if you're comfortable, just to me, where you see yourself on that spectrum of the 6 Americas, from a sense of dismissiveness or kind of doubt, or disengagement, up to cautious, concerned, or alarmed. So I'll read those definitions, but if you are comfortable identifying yourself on that spectrum, feel free to do so in the chat to me.
Concerned.
You.
The hostess. I did it to everyone.
Another 30 seconds. Okay, thank you. So for the folks that felt comfortable chiming in, everyone was either alarmed or concerned. And this sort of trends as the nation is trending. The most recent update from this Yale University study shows that about 33% of the country is feeling alarmed, about 25% is concerned. You can see the numbers going down to about 10% who are doubtful, 9% who are dismissive. So the good news from a scientific perspective is that this sort of range has really shifted over the last 10 to 15 years. It was much more balanced, or even leaning towards the right side of the graph. But now if you do the math, you have almost 60% of the country that's feeling alarmed or concerned. And then the last part of the context I want to share, and this is for those of us in the education space, so I won't go too deep into it, is that there is broad public support in the US for climate ed. 80% of parents, 86% of teachers think this is essential, and yet only 40% of teachers are actually teaching to this. We know that it's impacting our students' well-being and social emotional health. Upwards of 60% of teens report climate change inspires fear, and yet they're motivated, and yet over half have never had it addressed in their schools. But the good news is youth are already engaging and really leading this movement. So in 2019, nearly 25% of teenagers did something in terms of climate activism. In 2021, a third of adults in Gen Z did something. And we have schools around the globe that are responding to not what their teachers and parents are saying, but what the young people are demanding. And the other acknowledgement I want to make before we get into the meat of the issue is just an acknowledgement of privilege. I think as I'm getting to share these stories in broader and more diverse contexts, I think to recognize as a white, straight, Catholic American male with a wonderful upbringing in a place like Helena, Montana, I have a tremendous amount of privilege and therefore responsibility. And that privilege has been reflected back on me by my colleagues and students here in Oakland, as I learn more and more that the people most directly impacted by climate change are the people who have caused the least amount of it, especially communities of color and communities on the kind of historical margins along poverty lines, et cetera. What they're calling the fence lines of where the industrial kind of capitalist complex has done some damage. So on the left is my current team. They're called the Creation Care team at O'Dowd. And on the right is our student-led eco-leadership team. And it's been a gift to be part of a community of young folks and older folks committed to our common home. This is a school that has baked kinship with creation into its mission. And I think it's something for St. Mary's to reflect on, because I know St. Mary's already has some beautiful work going on in terms of creation care and the Jubilee Garden. But institutions that are really writing this commitment into their mission statement, their vision statement, their charism statement, have more of a leverage point when it comes to making meaningful change. This is just a quick glimpse at the legacy of kinship with creation at our school. Going back to 1968, one of the first schools in the country to have environmental ed, up through visits by Jane Goodall and others, buildings built to be LEED certified, and then more recently integrating spirituality into, ecology into our religion, math, English, and science classes. So with that in mind, part of what I'm so excited to share as a sign of hope and a sign of empowerment and a sign of solidarity and resiliency is that this is an amazing time to be a Catholic. And I think it's in particular an amazing time to be a Catholic who has a sense of land and land ethic. And that's why, you know, Montana Catholics, I think, are situated to really be leaders right now. People that are deepening their relationship with God and in service, but also having a sense of the land and that their outer landscape has affected their inner landscape. So as we mentioned earlier, Laudato Si was the groundbreaking encyclical of 2015. I know the first time I read it, it really changed my life. I had a chance to meet the Pope briefly after it was published. And I want to share a second favorite passage from this because I think this kind of sums it up, and it also echoes his Jesuit roots. He says, all of our efforts, especially in terms of education and ministry, don't mean anything if it's just scientific curiosity or sort of spiritual kind of reflection. He says what we have to do is to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what's happening to the world into our own personal suffering, and then discover what each of us can do about it. Painful awareness, the courage to turn it into our own suffering, the courage of empathy and compassion and solidarity, and then the discovery of action. And wake up to what we're called to do. So what's radical about this message, and I think sort of unprecedented, he's actually calling for a paradigm shift. And without getting too deep into the psychology of paradigm shift, the idea is that it's calling for a widely accepted belief or concept to be changed, to be uprooted, to be shifted across every sector. And I think scientific and spiritual leaders alike are calling for sort of that radical shift. And I'll just share one more quote from Laudato Si. He says, if we want to bring about the deep change, we need to realize that certain mindsets really do influence our behavior. And our efforts at education will be inadequate and ineffectual unless we strive to promote a new way of thinking about human beings, life, society, and relationship with nature. So those of us that are in the industry of changing minds, this is a particular call to deep ecological conversion. So I actually want to sink our teeth into Laudato Si, but before I do, I'll just pause for a minute if there's any questions or reactions to some of the context I shared, out of which Laudato Si was written. Okay, well, please feel free if a question comes up to jot it down, and we'll have some Q&A time near the end. So the Laudato Si Action Platform was launched in 2019, and the Pope said, listen, I wrote this document. It's time that we really do something about it on a global scale. And so this platform is a chance where the 7 sectors of the Catholic community through 7 goals commit to a 7-year action plan towards total sustainability. And I would love to see St. Mary's Parish join on that list. These are the 7 sectors identified by the global church. So it's a call to families, parishes and dioceses, educational institutions from universities on down to high, middle, and elementary schools, healthcare institutions, organizations and groups, the economic sector, and of course, religious priests and nuns and religious communities. So I hope as I tell you a bit more about this platform that you consider whatever sector that you're a part of, what it would look like to challenge, invite the key stakeholders of your group to sign on to the Laudato Si Action Platform in this unprecedented moment of global solidarity for the planet. The pillars of the platform are to build community, to share resources and best practices, and then to help folks develop actual doable concrete plans that would be reflected on and renewed each year. And the reason it was launched is the Pope was very astute, saying that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are inherently connected. That is, what's happening to the planet and what's happening to the least among us is very much an integrated reality, and we need to solve the social and ecological problems together. So one way we found that people are engaging is to actually share letters from the higher ups in the church. This one comes from Cardinal Turkson, one of the Pope's right-hand folks, which I'll share as a resource later. And then the other way to engage most effectively is through the actual platform. The QR code is here, and I'll share the link a little bit later as well. But what I'm gonna do is walk you through briefly the 7 goals of the platform, and then give you just a snapshot of how it's playing out in my world in a really simple way, and then in maybe a more bold, ambitious way, and encourage you to think about whether it's in your family, your parish, if you're part of any of those other sectors, what are simple or more profound ways you could try to live out these goals and these commitments. So the first goal of the platform is to respond to the cry of the earth. So 2 quick examples from my context. One is just tending to the flora and fauna of our particular place. And a more kind of bold, ambitious example you can see on the right is we've had over 20 years a transformation of a 4-acre, it was actually an old rock quarry covered in waste and weeds, into a thriving forest, certified wildlife habitat and outdoor classroom, primarily at the hands of student and parent volunteers.
Mm.
The second goal is responding to the cry of the poor. This plays out in simple acts of service to those parts of society directly impacted by climate, food justice, etc. And then on the right, kind of more systemic examples. This is an example during COVID where we started providing garden starter kits for public school families who had depended on their school for food until the schools shut down.
Mm.
The third goal of the platform is to consider ecology when making economic decisions. So this could be as simple in the upper left is the kind of coffee and tea we chose for our faculty break room, or maybe for your parish hall. Is it sustainable? Is it fair trade certified? Is it recyclable, etc.? To more robust commitments like installing solar panels. About 70% of our power next year will come from solar. I've heard that St. Mary's has some solar panels, congratulations. And even integrating ecological considerations into new construction. On the bottom right is an environmental studies building that was Platinum LEED certified. The fourth goal of the platform is to adopt and encourage sustainable lifestyles. In a school setting, this happens all the way from what you're teaching your youngest kids about waste sorting to what you're teaching your faculty, staff, and administrators about what we drive and how we live. And I think in a parish setting, it's similar. So a low-hanging fruit on the left was just more attention into and intention into our waste sorting. The main goal being less waste, but that waste that is produced, how it's sorted between landfill, recycling, and compost. And on the right, a more robust example is developing a really elaborate composting system in our kids in a Catholic school, learning about how death really does become new life when all of their food waste from the cafeteria becomes nutrient-rich soil, and then the garden that we harvest services back to the cafeteria.
Mm.
A fifth example of a goal from the Laudato Si Action Platform is to prioritize ecological education. So in a parish setting, of course, this could happen through what's being taught in religious ed, to what extent the outdoors are being utilized as a learning space, to what extent Catholic social teachings on care for creation are being woven into what's informing and inspiring the kids. So here on the left, we just have a simple example of teachers using outside as a classroom. And this is actually one area of education that really had an uplift during COVID. As you can imagine, schools and school districts trying to keep kids engaged, but trying to keep them safe, started using outside. And the benefits socially, emotionally, academically, spiritually, and physically of outdoor education are really compelling. Of course, in places like Montana, it's a seasonal thing. Although Montanans are tough, so I think even learning outside in the winter is powerful. On the right, we have kind of a more integrated example of having our education go beyond our campus into the community. And so these are students working at a local community garden, artists and homeless folks.
They all have Zooms now.
The sixth of 7 goals of the platform that you're encouraged to reflect on is the nurturing of ecological spirituality. That could be as simple as the kind of prayers and readings that are being woven into liturgy, Bible study groups, programs like the one we're sharing tonight. And then it could be more kind of bold and robust as what retreats are focused on, or longer term Lenten or Advent programs that bring ecological awareness to bear. And then the final goal of the Laudato Si Action Platform is to cultivate community resilience and empowerment. And this is something that can make some Catholics uncomfortable, but it really is the Pope at the highest level of church teaching calling for advocacy and activism and speaking truth to power. And I know for me, I've had an opportunity to accompany young people, whether it's through city or local or state or national advocacy and activism, and to see the way that they're waking up the minds and hearts of the people in power has been really amazing. And I guess I'd be remiss to not mention that unfortunately in the US, climate change and climate education has become a politically or politicized issue, like so many other things. And I know when I'm entering into a parish setting in Montana versus Oakland, there might be different messages that are being uplifted and issues prioritized. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. So in short, these are the 7 goals of the Laudato Si Action Platform. And what I'd love to do is to actually send you back into a quick pair share. And maybe you could briefly share what's one of these things that you are already engaged in personally or with your family or with your parish or organization. And what's one of these that maybe is not really in your wheelhouse right now or just kind of feels out of reach. Okay, so just a brief share out. What's one of these goals you feel like you're already living out in a simple or profound way? And what's one of these that feels a little more challenging or out of reach? Thank you in advance for sharing. We'll see you in a couple minutes.
Thank you.
Buddy. So in summary, and again, I'm wearing my hat as an ambassador of the Vatican's Laudato Si Action Platform Working Group. Really encourage you to consider whether it's your family, your parish, your organization, if you're connecting the schools, to consider enrolling for the Laudato Si Action Platform. And it's really as simple as the following. Every year there's a self-assessment that's very reflective and prayerful in a uniquely Catholic way. To discern where you are on the road to integral ecology. That's the first requirement. The second requirement is to reflect on your values and how they apply to these goals, as you just did for the last few minutes. And the third piece is to actually develop a plan with an achievable goal in concert with other stakeholders or leaders of your family or parish or other group, and map out some target outcomes for the following year. So these 3 steps, a self-assessment, a reflection, and an annual plan, are all that are required. There is no Laudato Si police. The Swiss annual self-reflection and self-assessment along with other members of your community. So I have some good news and some bad news in terms of how this is playing out. Laudato Si was a global document. There are certain places where folks have turned it into an opportunity for bioregional reflection, because when it comes to a land-based ethic, it makes sense to be in concert, in communion with the people that share your ecosystem, your bioregion, your watershed, your climate disasters, your beauty and fragility, etc. So for example, both the California and Minnesota bishops' conferences wrote their own bioregional responses to Laudato Si, and it's given some leverage and some traction for those parishes and schools and dioceses to think more locally about responding together. That's the good news. The bad news is that as a whole, the Catholic bishops of the US have been very quiet about the environment. Even though we have a pope who says this is a moral mandate, one of the greatest existential questions of our time, since he published Laudato Si, calling for an all hands on deck moment of ecological conversion, what percentage of bishops' writings in the US have referenced the environment? Does anyone know?
No.
The study just came out from Creighton University. It was about 0.8% of bishops' teachings since 2015 have referenced the environment. And there's other layers to that in terms of what they're choosing to prioritize, or even when they use Laudato Si, the certain passages, they're sort of proof texting. So I'm sharing this. I'm grateful to be in California working with the bishops. Unfortunately, the guy who wrote this died the day it was published, so we lost one of the voices here. But I think Montana could be a place, because we have such a connection to land, that priests and bishops could make those connections and more explicit. So before we close, I wanted to raise a question for you and share one more story. I'm really curious, what is the why of you coming here? Maybe it's because you knew me, because I played soccer with your son, or you're my mom's friend and you're here to support. And thank you for everyone who came. But I imagine there's a deeper why that's calling your curiosity and your conscience to this issue around caring for our common home. And I think it's important to stay grounded in your why, not just to be clear, but to have the conviction and the courage and the resiliency to stay with this work, which will be so important in the coming years. So I want to share part of my why. This is the global climate strike in September of 2019. I had a chance to bring some of my students. I had about 19 students in my class, and I challenged them to try to mobilize their student body to skip school on a Friday and hit the streets of San Francisco, which students all over the world would be doing. And they were able to get 400 kids to skip school that day and meet in San Francisco, and they got me in big trouble. And the next day, I was looking through the New York Times just to check out this global moment where literally millions of young people hit the streets, skipped school, and said, our future's at stake, our own children's future's at stake, and we need the people in power to start acting and demanding change. It was really a beautiful moment and really unprecedented in terms of global youth activism. And so I'm looking at Paris and Mumbai and Dublin and Buenos Aires, and was excited to see San Francisco, where I was. And as I get to the San Francisco picture, I noticed that in the foreground is my student, Ludwig. He was a Chinese foreign exchange student. And what was so profound for me in seeing him was he's a student who knew nothing of social justice growing up in China, had never been part of a march or any moment of activism. And he felt so alive that day to be with students in an act of activism. But then as I looked closer, I realized that behind him was a boy and realized it was my son, Isaiah, who was about 8 years old at the time. And he's holding a sign that says, "Mother Nature is crying," and wearing a shirt that says, "The future starts here." And
That was him.
for me, this was my why, was a moment where this kind of intellectual curiosity about climate change and this kind of heart-driven vocation towards teaching sort of dropped into my gut, which was, this is my kid and this is his future. And it suddenly became more of a calling and a conviction than just a curiosity. And that, yes, that is my hat in the New York Times. So I wanted to mention that just a couple weeks ago, Isaiah, who's now 11, was doing a middle school science project where he had to pretend he was water, interviewing for a job of making a canyon. And he hated the assignment because he doesn't like to mix imagination with science. But really, that's what we're all called to do right now, is to use our God-given gift of imagination and apply it to what scientists are telling us. And what I learned from Isaiah was that water breaks down rock, that the simple flow and movement of drops can actually destroy things that have been building for millions of years and compacted, that are seemingly unbreakable structures. And part of the way the water does that is to find where there's already a crack or a groove or a soft spot or a path of least resistance, and to flow through that. And for me, it became a really helpful metaphor in these conversations around climate, where those of us that are trying to fight this fight, there's a lot of resistance, there's a lot of bumping into the layers and layers of systems and structures that are trying to perpetuate the status quo that's destroying the planet. And yet, everywhere I go, there's also cracks and grooves and just the individual drops of people trying to create change. So it's interesting, with that metaphor in mind, to see this recently shared out by the Jesuit Schools Network, and the Ignatian family of Jesuit institutions is now doing a lot in regards to caring for our common home as well. And they had used a similar metaphor, which was the individual drops of people become streams, the streams become rivers, and so on. And it's these kind of mighty rivers that can change systems and structures, which is what the Pope and what science is calling for. And I love that they had a quote from Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah imagines that God sends rain and snow upon the earth that will not return until they've done their work. So I'll share some resources at the end, including what the Jesuits are doing in this regard, which I found very useful. They're going to do a Laudato Si Lent starting shortly through the Ignatian Solidarity Network, which I would encourage you to check out as a parish reflection tool. Because this is the work that's demanded of us, is changing huge systems and structures that seem ominous and daunting, but we can do it when we do it together. So just to close on a word of hope, because some of this can feel quite ominous, Laudato Si actually ends with this assertion. The Pope says, "In union with all creatures, we journey through this land seeking God, so let us sing as we go. Let us sing as we go. May our struggles and our concern for this planet never take away the joy of our hope." The joy of our hope. This is a young man I met on the front steps of the US Capitol. I brought some students there last fall, and he was hunger striking for his future children. And he attributed it to what he learned in his Catholic parish, his Catholic high school, his Catholic university, that he was called to really put his life on the line. And someone said to him, "Why would you do this? There's so much to lose." And he says, "No, but there's so much to win. There's so much to win." So I invite you to think about what we have to win together. Okay, thank you so much. That's a lot of talking, but it's something I really believe in, and I'm grateful for the audience. And I'd love just to open up to conversation for our last few minutes together.
Wonderful presentation, Michael. You're brilliant.
Thank you, Liz. It's a privilege. I traded places with you. I'm trying to keep fighting the good fight in the Bay Area since you left.
Get a hold of my renegade kids. Whose garden is this? Is that St. Mary's?
Yes. Yes, it
That's
is.
beautiful.
So Michael, thank you so much for the inspiration and just the way you put the whole presentation together. I mean, it gives you lots of hope and, a means of action. And so thanks. It's, just an honor to have you here and to see you back in Montana, even though it's on a screen.
Yes. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
I just want to, just in case anyone was curious, Phyllis and I met just last week, and we talked about talking with Father Jeff about St. Mary's joining the Laudato Si Action Plan. So that is something that is definitely on our minds and hearts, in case anyone was wondering. So
Good idea.
Great.
I knew Father Jeff from back in the legendary lodge days, where I was an assistant director for a couple summers, and we'd be happy to follow up as a resource for him as he takes the helm. I appreciate Jim Tucker just dropped in a John Lewis quote, "Good trouble," and I think that that's what we're called right now, is to make good trouble. And the fact that a Catholic voice that's well respected is calling for that, not as an invitation, but really for kind of as a mandate. What a great opportunity to get in trouble together. Thanks, Jim.
Michael, I'm interested in the passion and involvement of your students and obviously some of the faculty. How has that rolled out that you've seen through the families, the parents and the families of the kids in your school?
It's a really good question, and I'd be happy to have a longer conversation with you afterwards, but just in brief, since our time's ticking away, it really depends upon the kid. And to use that metaphor again, it's like finding the paths of least resistance and trying to widen those. I think we have the good fortune of a legacy. There's been many years of this. So right now at my school, it's cool to be green. It's a privilege to be an eco leader, et cetera. And I think there's a very interesting study about what changes people's minds around climate change. And it showed in this particular example, even more than science, even more than doomsday predictions, what really converted parents and grandparents towards taking this seriously and believing and doing something about it was a conversation with a middle schooler. A conversation with a middle schooler. So I think, back to your question, when young people can have a heart for this, a connection to a place that they love, that they see is maybe at risk, and then enough science to be able to kind of articulate why this matters, we found that that's really moving families.
Thank you.
Wow.
How about other school experiences in the Oakland Diocese, Michael? Are they picking up on it as well?
They're definitely picking up on it. And I was invited to speak to all the principals back in November, and then to about 150 teachers in January. And what I'm really pressing now, and the new superintendents on board, is having diocesan regional collaboration. So we're going to host a workshop day for Laudato Si just before Earth Day, and invite every school to sign on at the end of the workshop to the platform. So to your question, Jim, I think when you have a place that's lucky enough to be sort of a luminary or an exemplar of best practices, it's easy to start to inspire other communities around it, because they have a proximate example, especially if the example is generous with resources and time and energy. So we're not batting 1,000, but there's a lot of grooves to explore here in Oakland. not to mention the fact it's kind of a hub for environmental justice work. And students are tuned into the fact that if you care about social justice, you should really be caring about what's happening to the planet.
Mhm.
Michael, as a former teacher, I'm concerned about the 40% of teachers, of the 80% of teachers that are actually teaching it. I'm wondering, is there a definite curriculum in your state or in your district for teachers, you know, what to teach at different grade levels? Or is it just an individual, you know, is it just up to the individual teacher to implement?
That's a really good question. I want to be able to see all these fine faces. So in California, we're fortunate. The legislature just passed, I believe it was a $9 million bond with our surplus towards universal climate education. And the two folks who co-authored it, I fortunately have been able to be collaborators with them. So here in California, over the next 2 years, there'll be universal K through 12 climate ed modules. The only other place that's done that right now is Italy. And what's interesting is that was in concert with the Pope and the Vatican. So we're hoping to take that model of universal climate science and environmental justice ed and make it like as given as like learning multiplication, right? Or as learning the periodic table. We have a ways to go. In the Catholic school space, what I'm trying to do is leverage what's happening in the public schools in Catholic schools. So I approached the bishops and said, we need K through 12 modules. And they said, pick 1 year and you can develop, you know, a 1 year, take 3 years to develop a 1 year module. And I pushed back. Fortunately, I was approved to develop one for each grade band. So we now have 4th, 7th, and 11th grade curriculum, which will roll out on Earth Day. And we're hoping to share that, you know, as broadly as we can in the Catholic space.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, have you seen this being adopted at the parish level at any of the parishes that you've worked with in your area?
I have, yeah. So my home parish here, St. Columba, which is used to be an Irish parish named after St. Columba. Now it's an African-American gospel parish. They're signing on. It's an Irish priest in a gospel parish. It's the best. They're signing on, and the Vatican has a working group for parishes and dioceses, just as they have a working group for schools that I'm a part of. I'm not sure how much movement. It seems to me like it's kind of case by case. There's like sort of the individual kind of rogue parishes that are doing it, but in terms of like collective or like regional parish collaboration, I don't have a clear sense. I think certain dioceses are leaning into this, like the Diocese of San Diego, Diocese of Stockton, but many parishes have already signed on. And if it's useful as a resource, I could get you from the Vatican the list of American parishes already signed on and what their plans are, and that might just give a little fodder for Father Jeff.
Michael, I just wanted to express thanks for the way in which you gave recognition to the people who have lived in your environment generations ago. I've seen that done in Australia regularly with respect and honor given to the Aboriginal people. I've not seen it done very often in our country, except among Native American communities. So I really appreciate that recognition that we live with a history of peoples long before us, some of whom have had values and concerns just as we have.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that.
Thanks, Dr. Gibran, for acknowledging that. And I just would add, there's some really inspiring examples of land acknowledgements coming out of Canada, even at like professional sporting events. And I'm seeing it happen more and more in California, but it's controversial, especially in the Catholic school space, because part of the story of Indigenous people in California is what the Catholic missions did to decimate these cultures and languages, etc. So for example, the recent canonization of Junipero Serra, who has a high school named after him, etc., stirred up a lot of debates around how we lift up aspects of the Catholic faith that were connected to decimations of people and culture. Some of them are still here. So, but I think all the more reason for us to step up and speak up. The Pope said with the Brazil Synod a couple years ago about the Amazon, he said, to get through the climate crisis, we have to sit at the feet of Indigenous people. We have to sit at the feet of Indigenous people. And one of the responses said, well, then the church needs to take their foot off Indigenous people. So, but yeah, we've been very lucky here. And I think Montana, I mean, I remember growing up in Montana learning about sustainability practices of, you know, the Indigenous communities there. And it's another asset Montana has, is hopefully kids are learning about Native tribes and the cultures there.
I guess this is Mary Beth. My mind goes in different directions. Any rate, I think one of the roots of where we are is consumerism. And consumerism drives capitalism. And how do we moderate our way of life with those two things? Because kind of like a capitalistic society, I guess, I don't know anything else. I guess socialism, maybe, I don't know, but we have to stop buying or consuming. And I know we can't start at that point because we throw everybody off the train with that initial statement.
Mary Beth, thank you so much for saying that. You know, some would say, but if people realize the train's going over a cliff, then, you know,
well, then we'll jump off.
I think what you said is so important. And I think for that to be asserted bravely in every corner of the country and Catholic world, not just like the hippie Berkeley corners, like where I am, is absolutely essential. And part of it is, like you said, is like the lie of you must have, and you must have more and more and more to be fully human, is a lie that we have been fed on so many different levels. And I won't go too far into that, except to say the Pope has some beautiful reflections in Audacity about creative simplicity, life-giving simplicity, and critiquing the culture of waste, where there are things and there are people and there are places that are throwaway. So yeah, Mary Beth, I think what you said is beautiful, but it's super challenging and uncomfortable because there's implications for all of us who have just been, you know, raised in that kind of social structure. The person next to you has a son who could say a few things about critiquing capitalism.
Indeed.
You know, Michael, we talk in the Catholic tradition about the universal destination of all resources as being part of God's plan, not their destination for some or to some. You know, Mary Beth, I hear you say, you know, that we may have to stop buying. Is it a matter of stopping, or is it a more of just redefining our whole processes of consuming?
Sure.
Some consumption is necessary, you know.
What do you think, Jim?
I think redefinition is part of the task for all of us. You know, so much of our whole life journey is about redefining who we are, where we've been, where we're going, the why, of it all. Why not our relationship with the earth and the systems that connect us to it?
Yeah, I appreciate you using the word systems, because from a psychological perspective, the notion of like systems theory and realizing that everything is interconnected. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. in a letter from a Birmingham jail talked about like the interconnected nature of reality, right? Like all the threads are connected, and what's happening in one part affects this part. When you pull one thread, you know, you kind of shake up the whole web of life. And I think
Seattle.
Was that Chief Seattle? Yeah. So I think in John Muir talks about, you know, you touch one part of the universe and like you realize it's all interconnected, which is such a beautiful scientific and spiritual truth at the heart of every religion, right? Oneness, interrelationality, interconnectedness. I think back to the question of stuff, we have to move beyond the lie that we throw things away, that there is in a way, right? That there is a place or a people that's throwawayable. I think part of what we're reckoning with now is our waste is coming back into our water systems and therefore into us. You know, the new studies show that the average American breast milk now has plastic in it because it's so just pervasive in our water systems and our rivers, etc. So I wonder sometimes about the Catholic notion of the consistent ethic of life, sometimes having a very singular focus towards the issue of abortion, but there's more and more being written about the fate of the planet is the life issue, right? Or to say it more positively, our interconnected life systems, the systems upon which we depend, that is the kind of first and foremost life issue. I could talk about this stuff all night if anyone wants to hang on, but it's 7:13 and it's 8:13 there. I just want to thank everyone again for attending. It's really an honor. And to whatever extent I could be a conversation partner or a resource personally or with the parish, happy to do so. And I'll be coming back to Montana several times this year as well, if you want to have coffee or a beer.
Michael, I know that you had a slide up with a lot of those resources. Is that something that you could send me that we could either put in the bulletin or on our website or?
Sure, be happy to.
Okay. Because I think there were a lot of good resources there. So I will make that available in some way, shape, or form. This has also been recorded, so it will be on our parish website, if not tomorrow, Thursday. Yeah, that's a great.
And if there's anyone, as you guys are ushering in a new parish priest, if it would be helpful to connect him or anyone that's part of this team to folks that are doing the parish level work for the Audacity Action Platform, I'd be happy to put you in touch with folks just to see what other parishes are doing. Some of them are starting from scratch. I would say St. Mary's already has some really great things going, and that they might even be seen as a resource and an inspiration for other parishes. So thank you for what you're already doing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, yes, we can't thank you enough, Michael. This was just a gift for us all. So thank you for sharing your time and everything that you're doing. And especially, I think several people have said it, but there's a lot of hope, which I think is so good when we're talking about the subject. So thank you for offering that as well.
Just a quick word on hope. I know we lost Desmond Tutu and some other spiritual giants over the past few months. But one thing he said was, and Martin Luther King said something similar, that hope wasn't about winning. Because we may not win this whole battle. Hope wasn't about winning. Hope was about alignment with the good. It was about alignment with the good. What I love about that is when you know what you're doing or what you're part of is good, is right, then you're less attached to be a parent with along the way. And yeah, so I just want to share that too, because I got to keep my head up, because there's a lot to think about losing, but there's also a lot to win.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Love you, Mom.
Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Thank you,
Thanks.
Michael.
Bye.